In today's video, we're taking a look at 3 NHL veteran players who, if they don't have a solid 2020 NHL playoff run, could very well find themselves on the move this fall. And we also have some more award finalists to discuss as well. We'll jump into all the latest coming up next. Welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. Now, as I mentioned, we have a variety of things to talk about today. Let's kick things off with the NHL announcing some more award finalists. Now, of course, I don't think I mentioned it a few days ago, but we did get the finalists for the Ted Lindsay Award, which was Leon Draisaitl of the Edmonton Oilers, Nathan MacKinnon of the Colorado Avalanche, and Artemi Panarin of the New York Rangers. Of course, that's for the league's top player. Obviously, they all had phenomenal years. I don't think you can really argue with any of those choices. There's a few other guys could certainly be in the conversation as well. And then today we found out the nominees for the Calder Trophy for Rookie of the Year, as well as Jack Adams for the top coach for the season. When it comes to the Calder Trophy, it seems to be a battle pretty much between Cale Makar of the Colorado Avalanche and Quinn Hughes of the Vancouver Canucks. The third finalist is Chicago Blackhawks forward Dominik Kubalik, who had a really solid rookie campaign, putting up 30 goals. Now, there are some other rookies that were not finalists that do deserve to be recognized. I mean, Adam Fox of the New York Rangers is probably the next guy who I'm a little bit surprised. I wasn't sure if it was going to be Fox or Kubalik be that third nominee. I mean, it's hard to ignore a 30-goal scorer as a rookie, which is, I think, why he got a little bit more votes. And obviously, when it comes to Fox, if he's being looked upon as possibly having the third best season amongst rookie defenders, well, you know, I guess there's certainly some tough choices. The good news is we have some really solid, great young defensemen in this NHL, making the league rather exciting. I mean, even John Marino in Pittsburgh certainly deserve to be somewhat in the conversation. And Ilya Samsonov of the Washington Capitals had a phenomenal year as well. Sometimes goalies don't get as much recognition or as many votes unless they become a full-time starter and play the bulk of the games like a regular veteran NHL starting goaltender does. That seems to happen quite a bit if they come in as a backup and they only play 20, 25, 30 games. Even if they have phenomenal stats, they don't always get their recognition because they're not playing as many games and as many important minutes as some of the other guys that they're being up against here. But certainly lots of great rookies, a great crop this year. Personally, I think it's between Makar and Hughes. I'd love to know who you think deserves to win the most, so make sure you leave a comment down below. Now, when it comes to the Jack Adams Trophy for top coach of the season, it's come down to Bruce Cassidy of the Boston Bruins, Alain Vigneault of the Philadelphia Flyers, as well as John Tortorella of the Columbus Blue Jackets. Now, a lot of times, year after year, it seems to be a lot of the coaches that get nominated are coaches who basically brought their teams up a lot from the year before. Oftentimes, it's their first year as well. So you see a change in the head coach. The team improves a lot the next year. A lot of the times, those coaches do get the nod to become a finalist and a nominee for the Jack Adams Trophy. Now, there certainly were some other coaches that are pretty steady and had some solid years besides these three. But out of the three, I think personally, Tortorella might have an edge because I do think that he had a lot less to work with all the mass exodus of top talent leaving Columbus. The fact that they were able to be in contention for the playoffs was really a remarkable run, and they certainly did a lot better than I had expected myself. So personally, I would probably pick Torts as the winner. But the other two, I mean, Cassidy's been a solid coach for a long time. Doesn't always get the recognition because he's got a solid team. Same thing with John Cooper in Tampa. These guys sometimes get a little bit underappreciated because of the amount of talent. And even Mike Sullivan in Pittsburgh this year, yes, he's got some top grade A talent there with Crosby and Malkin, but you know what? They both missed time. They dealt with a ton of injuries, faced a lot of adversity this year. He was bringing up a lot of players from the minors and fitting them in and putting them into ways to succeed. And I think Sullivan certainly had a heck of a campaign as well and certainly deserves some recognition too. So let me know your thoughts on this award. Who wins the Adams Trophy for top coach for 1920? Now, as I mentioned as well, we're going to take a look at 3 veteran players who very well could find themselves on the moves and are facing a lot of pressure to perform on a higher level in the 1920 playoffs that are about to begin here in a couple weeks' time. Clearly, these guys are all in different situations, but we need to see playoff success or their teams could be growing frustrated and be looking for a change. Now, let's kick things off with the Calgary Flames forward Johnny Gaudreau. Now, Gaudreau's a player that's been facing trade rumors for probably the better part of a year or more. We've talked about him on the channel here recently. recently. There's been some other articles kind of speculating over his future and what the Flames might do. And I do think that a lot of what they're going to do will depend on this playoff run. Many speculated leading into the NHL playoffs before the NHL season was paused that this is the year that we need to see the Flames take a step forward, or there's going to be change within that core group of guys, and Gaudreau being the most likely to get the brunt of the fall here and end up seeing himself possibly traded. Now, of course, the Flames had a really poor outing in last year's playoffs against the Colorado Avalanche. They really were whooped pretty bad. They did not look good. Things fell apart after a remarkable regular season, and they just can't have that happen again. Now, this year's regular season was not quite as strong, and I do think they're going to have their hands full with the Winnipeg Jets team that they're playing in the play-in series to get into the round of 16, which would be the official Stanley Cup playoffs. Now, of course, in this situation, Johnny Gaudreau goes into training camp now with Phase 3 underway, and he's not even skating with the top line, which has drawn a lot of questions, and there's a lot of people asking what's going on with the Flames, what's going on with Johnny Gaudreau. You got Elias Lindholm and Sean Monahan are part of the main group of the skaters in the training camp, but Johnny Gaudreau is playing but Johnny Gaudreau is skating with the second group, which is mostly guys who are not going to be regulars, which is kind of odd. Also, you had some other guys like Derek Ryan as well as Dylan Dubé with Calgary in that same sort of situation. So you can't help but wonder, obviously, is it a case where they didn't show up to training camp in good enough shape? Like, you just don't know, because the NHL's pretty much put a kibosh on teams releasing any information. Obviously, if they're skating, it has nothing to do with having a positive test, nothing COVID related, because they would not be anywhere near the rink if that were the case. So it's got to be something else, whether it be some sort of injury or just their overall conditioning would be my guess, because they're certainly not the only team in this situation. There's other teams around the NHL too that have some questionable players that are kind of going in and out of practices, or practicing with the the second group and things like. You just can't help but wonder. I mean, did some of these guys think there was no chance the season was coming back and maybe didn't train as hard as they should have? I don't know, but certainly some questionable things going on in Calgary. You get an interim head coach looking to get that tag removed, and obviously having a failure in the playoffs is going to put his job in jeopardy too. But Johnny Gaudreau certainly is a player who's faced a lot of criticism in Calgary. He's also gotten a lot of praise when he's done really well, but he's been there long enough. Same with a lot of these other guys like Monahan and Lindholm and Matthew Tkachuk, that it's time to get some playoff success. And if it doesn't happen, I fully suspect we could see some major moves this offseason. Now, one of the things we talked about yesterday was Taylor Hall being a free agent and the possibility of him maybe ending up in Calgary. And obviously for him to go there, it would have to be because they created enough space by trading out another big-time player like a Gaudreau. Some feel that maybe that's a good possibility, and others feel that maybe that doesn't make a lot of sense, and it's debatable on what they do. But obviously, at some point here, something's got to give, and if they lose against the Jets, I do think there's a pretty good chance Gaudreau finds himself skating with a new jersey on in 2021. So let me know your thoughts on the pressure that Gaudreau was under, what's going on with him right now during training camp, and also if he is traded, where do you think is a really likely destination? Give me your mock trades down in the comments and we'll discuss further. Now, the other two players we're going to talk about today obviously are kind of linked together and could be linked together again in the future. We got Penguins goalie Matt Murray and, of course, Vegas goalie MarcAndre Fleury. Now, of course, with a guy like Matt Murray, who's still relatively young, he's a pending RFA. He's got 2 Stanley Cups to his name in his young career. It's hard to imagine why he's facing so much pressure, but you know what? Since that last Stanley Cup run, he's really fallen off. His play has really dropped, and he's got a young goaltender in Tristan Jarry that's been challenging him and really is threatening to take over the job as a starting goaltender with the Pittsburgh Penguins. Now, in Matt Murray's case, it sounds like based on interviews here with the team that he will be given the opportunity to start when the playoffs get underway, and it's basically his job to lose. But I also have the feeling that he's also going to be on a very short leash, and if they have a game or two against Montreal early on where he's not looking good, I fully suspect him to get the yank and have Jarry given the opportunity. Now, whether or not Murray gets back in will depend on how Jarry performs, of course, but Matt Murray's also going to be facing a lot of uncertainty because of the salary cap, like many NHL players around the NHL that are needing new deals. Of course, the Penguins, like many teams, are going to be tight up against them without seeing a rise in cap. And obviously, they can't keep everybody in the fold. It makes sense that Tristan Jarry is going to be a lot less expensive, and they could be saving a lot of money and potentially getting the same performance or better than their 2-time Cup-winning goaltender. So it might make a lot of sense for them to move on from Murray. Of course, that would require trading him since he's still a restricted free agent. But obviously, we talked about before, but maybe the possibility of him going to Vegas. But of course, a lot of that depends on how Vegas does with other things here in the playoffs and other moves, because there's certainly a complicated scenario for that to unfold. If it does, of course, the Penguins are not going to want to go beyond the current season with Murray and Jerry and lose another goalie to an expansion draft into Seattle. Of course, they lost Fleury to Vegas, which was, somewhat of a choice. They could have gone a different road, but really they would have lost a solid player no matter what, and they've seen an opportunity to kind of hand over the starting reins on a more of a permanent basis to Matt Murray and let Fleury move on to Vegas. In Murray's case, it's not that far into the future, and now he finds himself being pressured by another goalie, and he could have the same thing happen to him that Fleury did if they don't move him because of the expansion draft, or of course, if they do trade him, obviously they'll be moving ahead of time. I can't imagine the Penguins are going to want to lose another goalie, though, so I can't imagine them going past one more year with their current goalie tandem. So I know the Colorado Avalanche were a team that was mentioned a lot before. Apparently there were rumors and conversations that Sakic and company in Colorado were interested in Murray because their goaltending situation long term is certainly not rock solid. Obviously, we'll see how their goalies do in this year's playoffs, but Colorado's a team that's kind of knocking on the door to being a real legit solid contender and just needs a little bit more of a push, and having a cup-winning goaltender that's got some nice pedigree and a nice resume to come in and kind of stabilize things back there could be the missing ingredient if he can get himself back playing the way he did a few years ago when they were last winning Stanley Cups here. So I guess we'll see what happens to Murray, but obviously, again, like Gaudreau, his play in these playoffs will certainly dictate a lot of what happens here in his future. Now let's jump over to MarcAndre Fleury, former goaltender of the Pittsburgh Penguins, currently with Vegas. As I mentioned before, you get Fleury and Robin Lehner. Now Fleury had a phenomenal first year with Vegas. I think he was playing with a bit of a chip on his shoulder, going to show the Penguins that he can still get the job done, and he did that. He had a phenomenal year, took them all the way to the Stanley Cup Finals, was really close to bringing Vegas a Stanley Cup in their first season, fell a little bit short, but still had a remarkable run, brought a lot of excitement to the city, and was the face of the franchise from the get-go. But the last 2 years, his play has been dropping. His stats are not as good in the second year as they were in year one. In year three was down a little bit more again. So can he bounce back? There's not a wonder why Vegas brought in Robin Lehner at the trade deadline. I think if they had full confidence that Fleury was able to play at that level still, I don't think we would have saw them bring in reinforcements. They obviously didn't have a ton of confidence in Malcolm Subban to pick up the reins in case Fleury went down. And of course, Fleury's had some injury battles in recent years too. So between his health and his play not being as strong, Vegas clearly identified a need that they needed a solid reinforcement. They weren't going just for an upgrade as a backup. They brought in a proven starting goalie over the last 2 years, has been one of the league's top goaltenders, and really turned his career around. Now, of course, keeping Robin Lehner will be incredibly difficult, and I think the only possibility of them keeping Lehner is by trading MarcAndre Fleury, but no guarantees they get a deal done with Lehner. Clearly, Leonard's going to probably want some term after going on back-to-back one-year deals, but a lot has changed with the NHL landscape since the season started, and whether or not he'll get that is certainly up for debate for sure. But obviously, if Fleury has 2 more years on his deal at $7 million and does have a modified no trade, so there's a limitations on where he can go. But clearly, Leonard can challenge him. We've seen remarks from head coach Peter DeBoer in Vegas saying that he's got 2 great starting goalies, and he fully intends to play both of them, especially in the early part of the playoffs when they're doing the top 4 little tournament to determine the top 4 seeds. He fully intends both goalies to get game action as well as the exhibition game that they'll play ahead of time. So we'll see kind of who's playing a little bit better, who's a hotter hand, and see what happens. But if Fleury ends up kind of losing that starting job to Lehner, then I do see there being a really strong possibility that they try to move on from Fleury and sign Lehner when we hit the offseason. So I think it's a real strong chance. Now, in Vegas' case, they don't have to worry about the expansion draft. They're exempt. After paying $500 million for their franchise, they get that benefit here to not give up a player in this draft. But at the same time, there's just no way, logistically, from a cap perspective, that they can keep Lehner and Fleury both. And like many teams, they're really tight up against the cap, and they're likely going to have to shed some salary anyway. So could Fleury be a way to save some cap, bring in a younger, hotter goalie in Robin Lehner, and move the face of the franchise, who could be heading into his 3rd team to finish out the rest of his current contract and possibly the remainder of his career? Let me know your thoughts on MarcAndre Fleury, maybe getting moved from Vegas if he doesn't have a strong playoff. Could Robin Lehner take over the number 1 job in Vegas and get a contract to stay? Let me know your thoughts on how this could play out down in the comment section. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and turning on your notifications so you don't miss any future content, and give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.